All right, today I'm actually gonna do a video on something that somebody commented on YouTube, which I thought was a really good topic that I should talk about. And shout out to you. I forget exactly what video I saw it on. It might have been even one of the shorts that I posted. But either way, I just wanna say it was a great idea. So what we're gonna talk about today is how I pick hooks for my plugs based on the weight of the plugs or the weight of the hooks. So for the most part, and this is a kind of a pretty complicated topic, because when you buy a lot of lures off the shelf, the hooks that they give you and the hardware they give you is not always necessarily the best hooks or the best split rings or whatever that come with the plug. So what I like to do is I like to switch those out to something that I really believe in. And I've done videos on the hooks that I really like, and I've talked about the Owner ST66s or ST36s, and I've talked about the BKK Viper hooks, Viper 41 hooks. I mean, they're the two hooks I generally use if I can for all of my plugs. And the thing about picking the proper hook for your plug is you want to pick something that is really strong, and if it is tested, it's going to bend and not break. Because the thing about hooks is if they bend, you have a chance of actually landing the fish, but if they break, obviously you have no chance because the hook breaks and the fish will get off. So what I like to do is pick my hooks based on that, and I've fished with many different brands. Now, for the most part, and I would say the most generic saltwater hook that comes on most custom striped bass plugs, that comes on most stock brands, I would say is the VMC hooks. The VMC hooks tend to be the hooks that come on most of your plugs. So the thing about the VMC hooks is they have different strengths to them. And even what the majority of people use, being the 4X strong hooks, which is a pretty strong hook, still for the most part will get bent out if you're using heavy drag and you hook into a large fish. They will bend it. Or if you're catching a ton of mid-sized fish and it's just many fish on the same hook, will eventually weaken it and it will bend. So that's the good thing about the VMCs, is they will bend, they won't break on you, which is really nice. The other interesting thing about VMC hooks is there's different shank sizes for the hooks themselves. So there's different, so within a 3/0 sized hook, there might be 3 or 4 different weights that you can get for basically the same hook. So it is a little confusing sometimes when you're looking at the plugs on what hooks you want to match up with it. And so for the most part, what I do is I try to go with the heaviest hook I can without impeding the action of the hook, or the action of the plug rather. So I will weigh the hooks for the most part when I'm first starting out. I'm gonna weigh the hook and see if the weight of the hooks match up. So for a VMC hook, if you're going to bump up to a Owner, for instance, if I'm using a big spook, so a 9-inch spook, which I use a lot, and I switch out the hooks on those most of the time. And what happens with that is you can put like a 4/0 hook, 4/0 VMC hook rather, on your spook. And I like to bump that up to an Owner ST66 or an Owner ST36 hook. And by doing so, I gotta bump down the size of the hook. So instead of it being a 4/0, I'm gonna go down to a 3/0 sized hook. And that way I'm not going to dramatically impede the action of the plug by adding a hook that is way heavier than the other hook. Because I'll say this, like the beefier VMC or the beefier Owner hooks are way heavier than the VMC hooks. And the great thing about that is they will never bend no matter what you do to them when they're at that size. I mean, they're tuna grade hooks. You can literally catch tuna on them. So for striped bass, it's perfect for catching big striped bass. But you don't want to impede the action. And the interesting thing is you can actually go too far in the light direction. So say I'm trying to put on, again, I'm trying to put hooks onto a spook. A lot of the plug builders or a lot of the lure makers will design their plugs so that the action is dependent on having the weights of the hooks in the water. And if you go too light, it will make it really hard to work the plug, or it will make it really hard for that plug to swim or do whatever it's designed to do. So it's a twofold thing. So when you're testing out different lures and you're testing out different hooks to put on your lures, it's going to change the action of the plug if the weight of the hook itself is different from the weight of the hook that it comes with. Now, there are scenarios where I'm going to actually put on a much heavier hook, because even though that's gonna change the action of the plug, it might change it in a way that I actually want. And so you can mess around with that by adding heavier and heavier hooks. But if you wanna make it so the lure or the plug swims the exact same, what I like to do is I like to weigh them on a baking scale. So I'll get a baking scale and I'll go to ounces and I'll weigh the hooks and see if they weigh out similarly. And if they do, then that's gonna be the hook you wanna put onto the plug. Now, I remember doing this with something that, one of these plugs that I've always had the hardest time dealing with, and that's because it's a really little lure and it catches giant fish, and it's always a battle of, if you put too much weight on it, it's gonna sink, and if you put too little weight on it, you have a hard time working it. And that was really where I found my first issue, and that's the Rebel jumping minnow, which the Rebel jumping minnow might be the greatest little spook ever created. I've caught some absolutely enormous bass pushing 45 inches on this 4-inch long, tiny little spook. It's pretty dramatic. The difference between other spooks and the jumping minnow. For some reason, the jumping minnow just outcatches all other spooks no matter what. I've never seen a spook do what this does, and that is picky bass and really big bass out of schools of thousands of fish. I mean, it's truly something to just wonder at. I mean, it's an amazing looking plug as well. So what I did originally is I had a hard time deciphering whether or not what the best treble hooks to switch onto that was. Now, the hooks, the stock hooks that come with the Rebel jumping minnow are literally tin hooks. A largemouth bass, freshwater fish could bend them out, and that's what they're designed for, rather. So the Rebel jumping minnow is basically designed for freshwater fish, and the hooks that come on them are horrible, like the worst hooks you could ever imagine. So trying to find the right sized hook to put on that plug is a challenge. Now, I would usually change them out for a 4X strong VMC that's probably 1.0, and I messed around with different shanks, whether it'd be a short shank one or a longer shank one. I was messing around with the different hooks on there, and what I found was those plugs in particular will always, you'll have times where the action of the lure will get destroyed because I'll put something on too heavy and it will sink, or I'll put something on too light and you can't work it on the surface anymore. And it's really frustrating because I couldn't figure out what the best hooks were for it, and I'd always go back and forth and back and forth. But there is one happy medium, and that's like the 1.0 VMCs. I always found generally, for the most part, would walk and make the plug work the best. Now, the other thing that a lot of people are switching over to now with the state of the fishery and everything like that is single inline hooks. So instead of using treble hooks, they're using inline hooks. And inline hooks are very hard to match with trebles because there's a whole different weighting to them, and it just adds a completely different action to your plug. Even if they are the same weight as the treble hook that you're using, it's just a different, there's just different mass center. The center of mass changes on the plug, and it makes it really difficult for you to have that lure work consistently like it was before. So this is something that's even harder to change out. And then if you mix and match them with treble hooks on the belly and maybe you put a single on the tail, that's also going to change the action. So what I found is, for the most part, you want to go a lot smaller on the single hooks than you would imagine. So if I had a treble hook and a single hook of the same weight, I'm gonna try to go a little bit lighter on the single hook than the treble hook, and that's gonna give you a closer action to the treble hook because it's gonna change the center of mass on the plug. And that's something that it took me a while to figure out because I switched them out on my spooks, and the spook would have a different action, a more erratic walking action, where it would walk nicely, but then clearly the weight of the hook would kind of pull the back in a weird way, and it would just like not walk one time and just kind of shoot forwards instead of walking, and then it would get in line and the mass would be correct again, and then it would walk nicely, and then it would kind of shoot. And I was like, what's going on? So I downscaled the single hooks on it, and all of a sudden it actually started walking a little bit nicer. And I was like, all right, so having the smaller sized hook definitely helps. I think it has a lot to do with the center of mass on the plug. So that is my general rule of thumb when it comes to picking treble hooks. And I have videos, I have a video on my 2 favorite treble hooks where I go kind of in depth on why I like those treble hooks so much and why they are very productive and why I switched them out on all of my plugs. Now, if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.